Are you expecting anything different from negotiations now with Dominic Raab as Brexit Secretary?
Absolutely not. This is going to be quite a fractured summit. Let's not forget that time is quickly running out. The UK has still not put proposals on the table that are acceptable for the EU, although Theresa May's most recent set of proposals, she's been begging the EU not to shoot them down. So that's something for a basis of talks. But Dominic Raab is not going to change the mood music, really, when it comes to Brexit. Not much on substance either. I think that the number one issue that's going to be highlighted in that meeting today is that there still is no solution for Northern Ireland and the border issue. And I think we'll see both sides talking about stepping up contingency planning for a no-deal Brexit. That, of course, is alarming. And I don't know if markets have quite realized the risk that indeed these talks could all break down with no deal at the end.
So the prospect of that no deal, I mean, we've been talking a little bit about that in relation to cable. But before we get to that, are there any sort of steps along the way where we could see cause for hope, Nina?
Well, I think that Theresa May's proposal, which, by the way, much of her own party are ripping to shreds, is a basis for negotiations. But what we'll have to see, if that is to be actually constructed into a deal, is that the UK will have to make further concessions. They'll have to make further concessions on money. They'll have to make further concessions on the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, and further concessions on free movement, even though they might not call it free movement. And I think that what you might see is such a paralysis in the domestic sphere, at least in the UK, with both Brexiteers, soft Brexiteers, hard Brexiteers, and those who want no deal at all, that the British government is simply unable to move. This, of course, 8 months before the UK is due to leave. And of course, when we talk about the no-deal option, that is seen by everyone, including the EU, as such a nuclear option that it was not even seen as a remotely viable prospect.
Nina,
but because of sheer incompetence and lack of time, it could happen.
Nina, I want to ask you a question that I've asked a couple of times over the last couple of days, and you're uniquely qualified to do it because you're with Rasmussen, the former Prime Minister of Denmark. What is the power or position of the tangential countries in continental Europe? It's all about Germany. It's all about maybe the Netherlands, maybe certainly France. They won the World Cup. That helps out as well. But what about the Denmarks of the world? Do they have a real voice here in Brussels and in the Brexit debate?
I think that what has happened in the talks so far is that the UK was hoping that countries like Denmark, countries like the Netherlands, would kind of tend to stand with the UK on European issues, would kind of stand up for the UK in the Brexit negotiations, because they, of course, have a lot to lose if there's a no-deal Brexit. Nonetheless, what we've seen is a remarkable unity in the EU 27. And why is that? Well, it's no surprise, because the single market, which has brought so much wealth and prosperity to the EU nations, it means that all of their interests, whether it's economically, strategically, or geopolitically, are aligned. And that has surprised the UK in these negotiations, because going into those talks, they were hoping to divide and conquer, and that has not happened. You see, the British cabinet unable to have a united position, and the 27 quite united.
This is brilliant. I mean, this is really, folks, what we've seen, which is, I love this phrase, divide and conquer, and it hasn't happened as well. So how does Prime Minister May adapt and adjust, given her domestic politics, to the failure of divide and conquer?
I think that the domestic politics is so far away from the reality of the negotiating position on the European Union that sometimes I cannot believe that Theresa May is able to wake up every day and go in and do the job again. I think what you've seen with Theresa May, at least, is that she's been mugged by reality. And you see that throughout the course of her speeches that she's done on Brexit, and how basically you're seeing the UK doing exactly what Syriza did in 2015 when they had their negotiation with Europe, when they promised the electorate something that was impossible and then had to entirely capitulate. That is what Theresa May is in the position of doing right now. But whether or not people in her own party will accept that, and is it so unacceptable to them that they would rather trigger the hardest of Brexits, or indeed a no-deal Brexit, which would be very damaging to the interests of the country? That is, I think, the prospect that we're facing right now.
Nina, I just want to come back to the white paper that you've talked about as a basis for negotiations here, and the fact that it puts forward a deal on goods but not on services. Is that not, to some extent, the deal on goods, a solution to the Irish border?
It is a solution to the Irish border. The problem, of course, is that the EU has said that the four freedoms are indivisible. So giving the UK a special kind of deal on goods, but exempting services from any kind of regulatory alignment is, of course, from the EU's eyes, cherry picking. Why should they give the UK that? Nonetheless, it's very interesting how Theresa May, before she presented the white paper, which, by the way, her cabinet couldn't even unite around for more than 48 hours, there was a lot of going and talking to EU leaders behind the scenes saying, please don't shoot this down. Please don't shoot this down as cherry picking, because just recognize it as a first opening gambit and then we can negotiate further. So as I mentioned earlier, this deal is the basis for negotiations, but we'll have to see the UK moving a lot more because fundamentally from the EU's perspective, it is still too cherry picky.